The stars were dying one by one, not from age or cosmic accident, but from the hunger of the Zephyrian Empire. Their massive ships moved through space like living nightmares, each one the size of a small moon, and covered in what looked like organic skin that breathed and pulsed with alien life. Admiral Vexthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Edge. His 6 eyes watched the view screen as another world burned below. The planet Altair Prime had been home to 3 billion beings just hours ago. Now it was nothing but ash and empty space. His biomechanical fleet had done its work perfectly, as always. The alien commander was tall and thin, his gray skin covered in patches of living metal that connected directly to his ship's nervous system. When he moved, the ship responded. When he thought, the weapons fired. The Zephyrians had evolved beyond the need for clumsy controls or computer interfaces. They had become one with their vessels. Status report, Vexthal commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds. All resistance has been eliminated, replied his second-in-command, a younger Zephyrian whose metal implants still gleamed with newness. The Altarian defense fleet lasted exactly 47 minutes. Their energy shields were absorbed and converted to power our weapons. Their plasma cannons were analyzed and improved upon. Their tactical computers were hacked and turned against them. Vexthal nodded with satisfaction. It was always the same story. Every species they encountered thought they were advanced. They had faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, artificial intelligence, and shields that could stop most attacks. But the Zephyrians had all of that and more. They had something that made them truly unstoppable: the ability to adapt and evolve in real time. Their ships were not built in factories like the crude vessels of lesser species. They were grown in biomechanical wombs, each one a unique organism designed for war. When enemy weapons hit their hulls, the living metal learned from the impact and grew stronger. When hostile energy beams struck their shields, the biosystems absorbed the power and redirected it back at their attackers. The Zephyrians had been conquering the galaxy for over 300 years. They had started as a small empire in the galactic core, but their adaptive technology made them nearly impossible to defeat. Each battle made them smarter. Each victory made them stronger. They learned from every enemy they faced, taking the best of their technology and improving upon it. Hidden in the shadow of a dead moon, far from the battle, Captain Jake Morrison watched the destruction through his ship's sensors. The Whisper was a Terran reconnaissance vessel, built for stealth and speed rather than fighting. Its hull was coated with materials that bent light around it, making it nearly invisible to most scanning systems. Morrison had been tracking the Zephyrian advance for months, documenting their tactics and trying to find some weakness. So far he had found nothing but death and destruction. Every fleet that faced them was destroyed. Every world they visited was left empty. They were like a plague that consumed everything in its path. "Captain," said Lieutenant Amy Carter from the sensor station. Her young face was pale with shock as she read the incoming data. "I'm picking up distress signals from 17 different star systems. They're all calling for help, but there's no one left to answer." Morrison's hands tightened on his command chair. Amy was fresh out of the academy, full of hope and dreams about exploring the galaxy. She had volunteered for this mission because she wanted to see new worlds and meet alien civilizations. Instead, she was watching them die one by one. "How many ships do they have?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. "Sensors show at least 200 bioships in this system alone," Amy replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And intelligence reports suggest they have thousands more spread across their territory." Morrison studied the tactical display, watching the Zephyrian vessels move with perfect coordination. They didn't need radio communications or complex command structures like human fleets. Each ship was connected to the others through some kind of biological network that allowed them to think and act as one massive organism. The largest of their vessels was over 10 kilometers long, its surface covered in what looked like scales that shifted color depending on the light. Smaller ships, each still the size of a human cruiser, darted around it like fish around a whale. They moved with grace and purpose that no mechanical ship could match. "Look at that," Amy said, pointing to one of the smaller bioships on the screen. It just took a direct hit from an Altarian plasma torpedo. The explosion should have destroyed it. Morrison watched as the damaged vessel's hull began to glow with a soft green light. The hole torn by the explosion slowly closed as living metal flowed like water to fill the gap. Within minutes, the ship was completely repaired and back in the fight. Their regeneration technology is beyond anything we've ever seen, Morrison said grimly. They don't just fix damage, they learn from it. The next time someone hits them with a plasma torpedo, their hull will be ready for it. The Zephyrians had perfected warfare in a way that no other species had ever imagined. They didn't just build better weapons or stronger shields, they built ships that could think, learn, and evolve. Every battle made their fleet more dangerous than before. Amy pulled up another display showing the path of destruction the aliens had carved across the galaxy. They started in the galactic core 300 years ago. Since then, they've conquered over 4,000 star systems. That's billions and billions of lives, Captain. Morrison nodded, feeling the weight of those numbers. Each dot on the map represented an entire civilization that had been wiped out. The Rigelian Trade Federation, with its mighty merchant fleets. The Centauri Republic, known throughout the galaxy for its advanced science. The Vegan Star Empire, whose warriors were legendary for their skill in battle. All gone. All consumed by the Zephyrian hunger for conquest. What I don't understand, Amy continued, is why they do it. They don't seem to want our resources or our territory. They just destroy everything and move on. Morrison had wondered the same thing. The Zephyrians didn't colonize the worlds they conquered. They didn't steal their technology or enslave their populations. They simply erased them from existence and continued their march across the stars. It was as if the act of conquest itself was their only goal. Maybe that's just what they are, Morrison said quietly. Some species explore, some species trade, some species build great cities. The Zephyrians conquer. It's not about gain or territory or resources. It's about proving that nothing can stop them. On the main view screen, the last of the Altarian ships exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The battle was over. Another civilization had been added to the long list of the Zephyrians' victims. Set course for Earth, Morrison ordered. Maximum speed. Command needs to know what's coming. As the Whisper engaged its faster-than-light drive and disappeared into hyperspace, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that he was running from an unstoppable force. The Zephyrians had never been defeated. They had never even been slowed down. Their biomechanical technology was so far advanced that conventional weapons were useless against them. But as he watched the stars streak past his ship, Morrison held on to one small hope. Humanity had always been good at finding solutions to impossible problems. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to stop the unstoppable. Maybe they could find a way to oppose those who could not be opposed. The alternative was too terrible to consider. The emergency meeting room deep inside Luna Base was filled with the most important people in the Terran military. The moon's underground command center had been built to survive almost any attack, but as General Patricia Hayes looked at the holographic display showing the Zephyrian advance, she wondered if even this fortress would be enough. The three-dimensional map floating above the conference table showed the galaxy in red and blue dots. Red dots marked systems that had fallen to the aliens. Blue dots showed worlds that were still free. There were far too many red dots and not nearly enough blue ones. "The situation is worse than we thought," said Admiral Charles Murphy, his weathered face looking older than his 60 years. "The Zephyrians have destroyed 47 star systems in the past 3 months. They're moving faster now, like they're in a hurry to finish something." General Hayes studied the pattern of destruction. The alien fleet wasn't moving randomly. Across the galaxy, they were following a specific path, consuming civilizations in a careful order that seemed to make sense only to them. "What's their next target?" she asked. Captain Lisa Andrews, the Navy's top tactical expert, manipulated the holographic display with her hands. The map zoomed in on a cluster of systems near the outer rim of the galaxy. Based on their current direction and speed, they'll hit the Proxima colonies in 6 weeks. After that, they'll reach the core human worlds. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Earth itself would be in danger within 3 months. We need to understand how they fight, Hayes said, turning to Captain Jake Morrison, who had just returned from his reconnaissance mission. Tell us what you saw out there. Morrison stood up, his uniform still wrinkled from the long journey back to Earth. Their technology is unlike anything we've ever encountered. Their ships are alive, General. They think, learn, and adapt in real time. Every weapon we've developed, every tactic we've used, becomes useless against them within minutes. He activated his personal data pad, and combat recordings filled the air above the table. The assembled officers watched in horror as human-made weapons struck the alien vessels with no effect. Energy beams were absorbed and redirected. Missiles were caught and converted into raw materials. Kinetic weapons were deflected by shields that seemed to anticipate their arrival. The bioships communicate with each other through some kind of organic network, Morrison continued. They don't need radio signals or computer systems. When one ship learns something, they all learn it instantly. Fighting them is like fighting a single massive organism with hundreds of bodies. Admiral Murphy leaned forward, studying the recordings. What about their weaknesses? Every system has flaws. That's just it, sir. They don't seem to have any. Their hulls regenerate from damage. Their weapons adapt to any defense we put up. Their shields learn from every attack. The only thing they can't do is be in 2 places at once, but with the size of their fleet, that doesn't matter much. Dr. Helen White, the chief scientist from Earth's Weapons Research Division, spoke up from her seat at the far end of the table. We've been analyzing the wreckage from ships that fought them. The interesting thing is that their biomechanical technology isn't magic. It follows the same physical laws as our technology. It's just incredibly advanced. How advanced? Hayes asked. At least 1,000 years ahead of us, maybe more. They've mastered the integration of living tissue with mechanical systems in ways we can barely understand. Their ships grow rather than being built. They evolve rather than being programmed. Captain Andrews pulled up another display showing the fleets that had tried to stop the Zephyrians. The Rigellian Armada had over 300 ships. They lasted 18 hours. The Centauri Defense Force had the most advanced energy weapons in the galaxy. They were destroyed in less than a day. The Vegan Star Navy was famous for their battle tactics. The Zephyrians learned their strategies and used them against them. Morrison nodded grimly. Every conventional approach has failed. Energy weapons, kinetic weapons, nuclear weapons, exotic matter weapons, nothing works. They adapt to everything. What about unconventional approaches? Hayes asked. Has anyone tried something different? The Andromedans tried a virus attack, uploading computer code into the bioship's organic systems. The Zephyrians absorbed the code and used it to improve their own technology. The Tau Cetians tried psychological warfare, broadcasting fear-inducing signals. The aliens seemed to find it amusing. Dr. White stood up and walked to the holographic display. The problem is that everyone who's fought them has used advanced technology. They've been defeating high-tech civilizations for hundreds of years. Their entire evolutionary path has been focused on adapting to sophisticated weapons and tactics. What are you suggesting? Hayes asked. I'm suggesting that maybe we're thinking about this wrong. Maybe the answer isn't to be more advanced than them. Maybe it's to be less advanced. The room erupted in confused voices. Several officers began talking at once, their words overlapping in a chorus of disbelief. Less advanced? Admiral Murphy said loudly, cutting through the noise. Doctor, we're already centuries behind them in technology. How can being more primitive help us? Dr. White smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Because they've never faced primitive technology. Think about it. For 300 years, they've been fighting civilizations with energy shields, plasma weapons, and adaptive AI systems. They've learned to counter all of that. But what happens when they face something that doesn't adapt? Something that doesn't learn? Something that just hits hard and keeps hitting? Morrison began to understand what she was getting at. You're talking about going back to older technology, simpler weapons. Exactly. Their bioships are designed to absorb energy and adapt to complex systems. But how do you adapt to a chunk of metal moving at high speed? How do you absorb the energy from a purely kinetic impact? Captain Andrews looked skeptical. You're talking about building ships with technology that's hundreds of years old. Chemical rockets, gunpowder weapons, steel armor. That's Stone Age technology compared to what we have now. Yes, Dr. White said simply. Stone Age technology that the Zephyrians have never encountered. Their adaptive systems are looking for energy signatures, computer codes, and complex patterns. They're not expecting someone to throw rocks at them. General Hayes was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. It's crazy enough that it might work, but we'd need to build these ships fast. We don't have time for extensive testing. I've already been working on some designs, Dr. White said, activating her own datapad. Simple, brutal, effective. No energy weapons, no adaptive systems, no artificial intelligence. Just solid metal and kinetic force. The holographic display showed the rough outline of a ship that looked like something from humanity's early space age. It was thick and angular with none of the graceful curves of modern vessels. But there was something intimidating about its crude design, like a club compared to a sword. We call it the Defiance class, Dr. White explained. Pure titanium steel construction, magnetic acceleration cannons, railguns, chemical explosive, missiles. Everything the Zephyrians have never faced. Admiral Murphy studied the design. It looks like a warship from the 22nd century. That's exactly what it is. We're going to fight aliens from the far future with technology from our past. Morrison looked at the ship design and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. When can we start building? Construction began 3 days ago, Hayes said, surprising everyone in the room. I authorized the project after reading Morrison's initial report. We're converting the Mars shipyards to produce these vessels as quickly as possible. How many can we build? Andrews asked. If we're lucky, maybe 50 ships before they reach Earth. If we're really lucky, maybe 100. That's not many against thousands of alien vessels, Murphy pointed out. No, Hayes agreed. But it might be enough. We only need to prove that they can be beaten. If we can destroy even a few of their ships, it'll show the galaxy that the Zephyrians aren't invincible. Morrison stood up, his face determined. I want to captain one of these ships. I was hoping you'd say that, Hayes replied. You know their tactics better than anyone. You'll command the lead vessel. As the meeting broke up and the officers dispersed to their various duties, Morrison stayed behind to study the ship designs. The Defiance class wasn't pretty or elegant. It was a weapon designed for one purpose, to hit the enemy so hard that there was nothing left to adapt to. Outside the meeting room's windows, Earth hung in the darkness of space, peaceful and unaware of the approaching storm. But soon, very soon, humanity would show the galaxy what happened when you backed a species into a corner. The Zephyrians had never faced anything like humans before. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to stay down. The Mars shipyards had never seen anything like it. For over 200 years, the massive space stations orbiting the red planet had built sleek, elegant vessels filled with the most advanced technology humanity could create. Ships with energy shields that could stop a nuclear blast, weapons that could tear apart matter at the atomic level, and computers that could think faster than 100 human minds combined. Now they were building something completely different. Captain Rick Sullivan walked slowly through the construction bay, his boots echoing on the metal floor as he stared up at the massive ship taking shape above him. The USS Defiance was unlike any vessel he had ever seen. Where modern ships curved and flowed like works of art, this one was all angles and hard edges. Where other ships were built from lightweight materials and energy systems, this one was made from solid metal and mechanical parts. She's beautiful, isn't she? Said Chief Engineer Maria Gonzalez, joining him on the observation deck. Her voice carried a mix of pride and sadness. Pride in the work they were doing, sadness for what it represented. Sullivan nodded, though he wasn't sure beautiful was the right word. The Defiance looked like a hammer built for war. Her hull was 3 feet thick in places, made from titanium steel alloy that could stop almost any weapon. Her weapons were mounted in massive turrets that could rotate and fire in any direction. Everything about her screamed violence and determination. Tell me about her weapons, Sullivan said. Gonzalez smiled, and this time it was pure pride. 6 Magnetic acceleration cannons, each one capable of firing a tungsten slug the size of a car at 15% the speed of light, 12 railguns for smaller targets, 48 missile tubes loaded with chemical explosive warheads. And if all else fails, we've got close-range defense guns that fire solid metal bullets. No energy weapons at all? None. No plasma cannons, no laser batteries, no particle beams. Nothing the Zephyrians can absorb or adapt to. Just chunks of metal moving very, very fast. Sullivan walked along the ship's hull, running his hand over the rough metal surface. Modern ships were smooth and perfect, their hulls manufactured to precise specifications by machines. The Defiance looked like it had been hammered together by hand, which wasn't far from the truth. The workers had been so focused on speed that they hadn't bothered with making her pretty. "What about defenses?" he asked. "Armor," Gonzalez said, simply. "Lots and lots of armor. No shields, no energy barriers, no adaptive plating. Just good old-fashioned metal between us and them. The theory is that if their weapons can't penetrate our hull, it doesn't matter how smart they are." They walked to the bridge, where teams of technicians were installing the final control systems. Here, too, everything was different from a modern ship. Instead of holographic displays and neural interfaces, the Defiance had physical controls, mechanical switches, and analog gauges. The technology was so old that many of the younger workers had to look up instruction manuals to understand how it worked. "Why all the primitive controls?" Sullivan asked. "Because primitive can't be hacked," replied Lieutenant Commander Paul Davis, the ship's weapons officer. He was a thin man with tired eyes who had survived 3 encounters with the Zephyrians. Each time his ship had been destroyed while he escaped in a life pod. The aliens can take control of any computer system, but they can't hack a mechanical switch. Davis showed Sullivan the weapons control station. Instead of a sleek console, with touchscreens it looked like something from an ancient submarine. Physical buttons, mechanical dials, and analog targeting systems filled the panel. "Every system on this ship can be controlled manually," Davis explained. "If our computers fail, if our electronics are damaged, if the aliens try to take control of our systems, we can still fight, we can still shoot, we can still move." Sullivan appreciated the thought behind the design, but it also worried him. "How accurate will our weapons be without computer assistance?" "Not very," Davis admitted. "But we're not trying to be precise, we're trying to hit them so hard that precision doesn't matter. A tungsten slug moving at 15% light speed doesn't need to be accurate. It just needs to be in the general area." The crew of the Defiance was as unusual as the ship itself. They were all volunteers, men and women who had asked to serve on what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. Many of them had lost friends or family to the Zephyrian advance. Others were simply the type of people who couldn't stand by and watch their species be destroyed. Ensign Katie Walsh was one of the youngest crew members, barely 22 years old and fresh out of the Naval Academy. She had volunteered after her home colony was attacked. Her parents and younger brother had been killed in the first wave of the assault. "Why did you choose to serve on this ship?" Sullivan asked her as she worked on the navigation systems. Katie looked up from her console, her young face serious beyond her years. "Because someone has to try, Captain. Everyone says the Zephyrians can't be beaten, but that's what they said about every enemy we've ever faced. Someone has to prove them wrong." Petty Officer Greg Taylor was working on the ammunition storage systems. He was a big man with scarred hands who had spent 15 years maintaining weapons on various ships. He had seen what modern weapons could do, and he wasn't impressed. "Give me a good old-fashioned cannon any day," he said as he checked the magnetic acceleration systems. "You can't argue with physics, Captain. Mass times acceleration equals force. The Zephyrians can adapt to a lot of things, but they can't change the laws of physics." The ship's doctor, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, was setting up the medical bay. Like everything else on the Defiance, it was simple and functional. No advanced healing machines or genetic repair systems, just basic medical equipment and a lot of bandages. "Are you worried about serving on such a primitive ship?" Sullivan asked her. Dr. Kim shrugged. "I've worked in field hospitals in war zones, Captain. Sometimes the simple tools are the most reliable. A bandage and some antibiotics can save a life just as well as a fancy healing chamber. As the weeks passed, the crew trained on their ancient systems and learned to work together. The Defiance wasn't fast or graceful, but she was solid and dependable. When they fired the main guns in test runs, the entire ship shook from the recoil. When they maneuvered in space, she turned like a heavy truck rather than a sports car. But there was something reassuring about her crude simplicity. Modern ships were complex machines with thousands of systems that could fail. The Defiance had fewer systems, but they were built to last. She was the kind of ship that would keep fighting even when half her systems were destroyed. Commander Frank Lopez, the ship's executive officer, summed it up during one of their training sessions. This ship is like a caveman's club. It's not pretty, it's not sophisticated, but when you hit someone with it, they stay down. The other ships in the small fleet were similar in design but different in details. Some were optimized for long-range fighting, others for close combat. All of them shared the same philosophy: simple, brutal, and effective. As launch day approached, Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian fleet was continuing its advance, destroying civilizations and consuming entire worlds. Every day they delayed meant more deaths, more destruction. But for the first time since the alien invasion had begun, humanity had something that might work. They had ships that couldn't be adapted to, weapons that couldn't be absorbed, and crews that refused to give up. The Defiance wasn't humanity's most advanced ship. She wasn't the fastest or the most powerful. But she might be exactly what they needed: a hammer to strike at the heart of an enemy that had never been hit before. Sullivan activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, prepare for departure. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity. We're going to remind the Zephyrians that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The crew responded with determined voices, ready to take their primitive ship into battle against the most advanced enemy the galaxy had ever seen. They were David going up against Goliath, armed with nothing but stones and determination. But sometimes, that's all you need. The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, like a predator entering a hunting ground. Captain Rick Sullivan stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as it filled with red contacts. The Zephyrian fleet was exactly where intelligence had predicted, in the middle of harvesting what remained of the Keplerian civilization. "Contact report," Sullivan ordered. Ensign Katie Walsh bent over her sensor station, her young face illuminated by the green glow of the screens. "I count 47 alien vessels, Captain. Sizes range from escort class to that big one in the center. The flagship is over 12 kilometers long." Through the main view screen, Sullivan could see the alien ships in the distance. Even at this range, they were beautiful in a terrifying way. Their biomechanical hulls shifted and flowed like living creatures, and their weapons glowed with soft organic light. They moved through space with a grace that no human ship could match. "They've spotted us," reported Lieutenant Commander Paul Davis from the weapons station. "The entire fleet is turning in our direction." On the bridge of the Dominion's edge, Admiral Vexthul studied the lone human vessel with something that might have been amusement. His 6 eyes tracked the primitive ship as it moved slowly toward his fleet. Compared to his elegant bioships, the human vessel looked like a piece of scrap metal held together with hope and stubbornness. "A single ship?" Vexthul's translator made his laughter sound like grinding metal. "The humans send us one crude vessel? This will be even easier than I expected." His second in command, a younger Zephyrian with bright silver implants, leaned forward. "Admiral, our bioscanners are having trouble reading their technology. The ship appears to be built from simple metal alloys. Primitive materials for a primitive species," Vexthul replied. "Send 3 escorts to destroy it quickly. I want to finish consuming this system before the day cycle ends." Back on the Defiance, Sullivan watched as 3 alien vessels broke away from the main fleet and headed toward them. Each one was the size of a human cruiser, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that looked almost like breathing. "Enemy contacts closing fast," Walsh reported. "They'll be in weapons range in 2 minutes. All stations, battle stations, Sullivan announced over the ship's communication system. This is what we came here for, people. Time to show these aliens what human stubbornness looks like. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, even though most of them had never been in real combat before. Months of training on the primitive systems had prepared them for this moment. They might not have the most advanced technology, but they knew their ship inside and out. "Weapons ready, Captain," Davis reported. "All railguns loaded and charged. Magnetic acceleration cannons are online. Missile tubes are hot. Range to targets? 50,000 kilometers in closing." Sullivan waited, watching the tactical display as the alien ships approached. The Defiance was slower than the enemy vessels, but that was part of the plan. They wanted the Zephyrians to come to them, to get close enough that missing would be impossible. 30,000 kilometers, Walsh called out. 20,000. The alien ships opened fire first, their bioweapons sending streams of crackling energy toward the human vessel. The attack struck the Defiance's hull with tremendous force, but the thick titanium steel armor held. Sparks flew from damaged systems and the ship shook from the impacts, but she kept moving forward. "Damage report," Sullivan shouted over the noise. "Minor hull damage on decks 7 and 8, reported Chief Engineer Maria Gonzalez from the engineering station. All primary systems still online. Armor is holding." On the alien ships, biomechanical systems were already analyzing the energy from their weapon impacts, trying to understand how the human vessel's defenses worked. But there was nothing to analyze. The Defiance had no energy shields to adapt to, no complex defensive systems to hack. There was just thick metal armor that absorbed the hits and kept protecting the ship inside. 10,000 kilometers, Walsh announced. "Fire," Sullivan ordered. The Defiance's main gun spoke with the voice of thunder. 6 magnetic acceleration cannons fired simultaneously, sending tungsten slugs the size of automobiles racing toward the enemy at incredible speed. The recoil from the weapons was so powerful that the entire ship shuddered and groaned. The first alien vessel never knew what hit it. The tungsten slug punched through its biomechanical hull like a bullet through paper, tearing through the living ship's vital organs before exploding out the other side. The alien vessel convulsed once, its bioluminescent patterns flickering and dying, then broke apart in a shower of organic debris. "Direct hit!" Davis shouted with fierce joy. "Enemy vessel destroyed." The remaining 2 alien ships immediately began evasive maneuvers, their adaptive systems trying to analyze what had just happened. But there was nothing to analyze. No energy signature to study, no complex technology to understand. Just a chunk of metal moving at enormous speed. The second alien ship fired again, its bioweapons sending more energy streams at the Defiance. The attack scorched the human ship's hull and damaged several secondary systems, but the armor held. The Zephyrian ship's adaptive systems tried to find a pattern in the human defensive technology, but there was no pattern to find. "Railguns. Target the second ship," Sullivan ordered. 12 smaller railguns opened fire, sending a stream of metal projectiles at the alien vessel. The bioship tried to dodge, its living hull flowing and shifting to present a smaller target. But the human weapons weren't trying to be precise. They were trying to fill the space around the enemy with chunks of fast-moving metal. Several projectiles struck the alien ship's hull, tearing through the biomechanical armor and causing internal explosions. The ship's regeneration systems tried to repair the damage, but more projectiles kept hitting before the repairs could be completed. The third alien ship, seeing its companions destroyed and damaged, tried a different approach. It accelerated directly toward the Defiance, apparently intending to ram the human vessel. Its bioweapons charged for a close-range attack that would destroy both ships. "Incoming kamikaze run," Walsh reported, her voice tight with fear. "Missile tubes, fire all forward batteries," Sullivan commanded. 48 chemical explosive missiles launched from the Defiance, their primitive guidance systems locked onto the approaching alien vessel. The bioship's defensive systems tried to shoot down the incoming missiles, but there were too many of them. Most of the missiles struck their target within seconds of each other. The alien ship disappeared in a series of brilliant explosions. When the light faded, There was nothing left but scattered debris drifting through space. On the Dominion's edge, Admiral Vexthul stared at his tactical display in complete shock. 3 of his ships had been destroyed by a single human vessel in less than 10 minutes. His biomechanical systems were feeding him data about the battle, but none of it made sense. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our adaptive systems should have countered their weapons by now." His second-in-command was frantically studying the sensor readings. "Admiral, their weapons appear to be purely kinetic. Simple metal projectiles with no energy signatures. Our bioships have no experience with this type of attack." "Kinetic weapons?" Vexthul's voice carried disbelief. "They're using primitive projectile weapons. How can such crude technology be effective against our advanced ships?" The answer was simple, though the alien commander couldn't understand it. The Zephyrians had spent centuries fighting high-tech civilizations with energy, weapons, and adaptive systems. They had evolved specifically to counter advanced technology, but they had never faced anything as brutally simple as chunks of metal moving at high speed. "All ships, attack formation," Vexthul ordered, his voice filled with rage. "Destroy that primitive vessel immediately." The entire Zephyrian fleet began moving toward the Defiance, their bioweapons charging for a coordinated attack. 44 alien ships against 1 human vessel. The odds were overwhelming, but on the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Sullivan smiled grimly as he watched the enemy fleet approach. "They're angry now," he said to his crew. "Good. Angry enemies make mistakes." "All weapons ready, Captain," Davis reported. "Ammunition stores are at 90%. "Then let's show them what happens when you threaten humanity," Sullivan replied. "All guns prepare to fire on my command." The greatest battle in human history was about to begin, and for the first time since the Zephyrian invasion started, the aliens weren't sure they would win. The space around the USS Defiance erupted in fire and death as 44 Zephyrian bioships attacked all at once. Energy beams from dozens of alien weapons struck the human vessel from every direction, turning her hull cherry red from the heat. The ship groaned and shook as metal plates buckled under the assault, but the thick titanium steel armor held. "Hull temperature rising," Chief Engineer Maria Gonzalez reported from her station. "We're taking damage on all decks, but the main structure is intact." Captain Rick Sullivan gripped his command chair as another wave of enemy fire rocked the ship. Through the smoke and sparks filling the bridge, he could see his crew working frantically at their stations. They were outnumbered more than 40-1, but nobody was backing down. "Return fire all weapons," Sullivan commanded. The Defiance's guns roared in response. Magnetic acceleration cannons sent tungsten slugs racing through space at incredible speed. Railguns fired streams of metal projectiles. Missile tubes launched chemical explosives in every direction. The primitive weapons filled the space around the ship with deadly metal fragments moving faster than thought. The nearest Zephyrian vessel took a direct hit from one of the main cannons. The tungsten slug punched through its biomechanical hull and exploded out the other side, tearing the alien ship apart. Organic debris scattered across the battlefield as the dying vessel's bioluminescent patterns flickered and went dark. Admiral Vexthul watched from his flagship as another of his ships was destroyed by the crude human weapons. His 6 eyes tracked the primitive projectiles on his tactical display, but his biomechanical systems still couldn't find a way to counter them. How do you adapt to a chunk of metal? How do you evolve against simple physics? "Admiral, we've lost 7 ships," his second-in-command reported, his voice tight with fear. "Their weapons are causing massive damage to our biohulls. Our regeneration systems can't keep up." "Impossible," Vexthul snarled. "We have conquered thousands of worlds. We have defeated every advanced civilization in the galaxy. One primitive human ship cannot stop us." But even as he spoke, another of his vessels exploded under the Defiance's guns. The human ship was taking tremendous damage, her hull scarred and blackened by enemy fire, but she kept fighting. Every time the aliens thought they had her destroyed, she would fire again, sending more deadly metal into their ranks. On the bridge of the Defiance, the situation was growing desperate. Half the control panels were dark, and smoke filled the air. Several crew members had been injured by falling debris, but they stayed at their posts. Missile reserves down to 30%, Lieutenant Commander Paul Davis reported. Main cannon ammunition at 60%. Hull breaches on decks 5 through 9, Ensign Katie Walsh called out. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but we're losing atmosphere fast. Sullivan looked at the tactical display. They had destroyed 8 alien ships, but there were still 36 enemies left. The Defiance couldn't last much longer under this kind of punishment. Engineering, can you give me more power to the weapons? He asked. I'm already pushing everything past the red line, Captain, Gonzalez replied. If I give you more power, we risk blowing out the main reactors. Do it anyway. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as we can. The ship's power systems surged as Gonzalez redirected energy from life support and secondary systems to the weapons. The magnetic acceleration cannons charged faster, the rail guns fired more rapidly, and the remaining missiles launched in rapid succession. The increased firepower caught the Zephyrian fleet off guard. 3 more bioships exploded in quick succession as the human weapons tore through their hulls. The aliens had been slowly closing in for the kill, but now they began to pull back, confused and frightened by an enemy they couldn't understand. Vexthal felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. His fleet had conquered the galaxy through superior technology and adaptive evolution. They had never faced an enemy that couldn't be analyzed, studied, and overcome. But the human weapons were too simple to adapt to. There was no energy signature to absorb, no complex system to hack, no pattern to learn. All ships, concentrate, fire on their weapon systems, he ordered desperately. If we can disable their guns, we can still win this battle. The remaining alien ships focused their attacks on the Defiance's weapon turrets. Energy beams melted through armor plating and destroyed several of the smaller railguns. But the main cannons were too well protected, buried deep in the ship's armored hull. We've lost 4 railgun turrets, Davis reported, but the main weapons are still operational. Then keep firing, Sullivan ordered. Make every shot count. The battle raged for another hour. The Defiance continued to take devastating damage, her hull punctured in dozens of places, her systems failing one by one. But the human ship fought on, her primitive weapons continuing to claim alien lives. Dr. Sarah Kim worked frantically in the medical bay, treating injured crew members as the ship shook around her. We need to get the wounded to a safe area, she told Sullivan over the communication system. Doctor, there is no safe area. Sullivan replied grimly. Just do what you can. By the time the shooting finally stopped, 19 Zephyrian ships floated dead in space. The surviving 25 vessels had pulled back to a safe distance, their commanders unwilling to continue the attack. They had never retreated from a battle before, but they had never faced weapons they couldn't adapt to. The Defiance drifted. In the center of the battlefield, her hull blackened and torn, her weapons silent. Most of her systems had failed and fires burned on several decks, but she was still alive, still fighting. Damage report, Sullivan requested, though he could already see how bad things were. Main power is out, Gonzalez reported. We're running, on emergency batteries. Life support is failing. We have major hull breaches on 12 decks. Weapon status? 2 main cannons still operational, Davis said. We have enough power for maybe 6 more shots. Sullivan looked at the tactical display, where the remaining alien ships hung in space like vultures waiting for their prey to die. The Defiance had proven that the Zephyrians could be beaten, but she couldn't win this fight alone. Then something impossible happened. New contacts appeared on the sensor screen. Human ships, dozens of them, dropping out of hyperspace all around the battlefield. They were crude, angular vessels, just like the Defiance, their hulls bristling with primitive weapons. This is Admiral Charles Murphy aboard the USS Retribution, came a voice over the communication system. Sorry, we're late to the party, Rick. Orders from Earth. Finish what you started. The relief that flooded through Sullivan was overwhelming. The other ships of the human fleet had arrived, each one armed with the same simple, brutal weapons that had proven so effective against the aliens. All ships attack formation, Murphy ordered. Let's show these aliens what happens when you threaten humanity. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. The Zephyrian bioships, already confused and demoralized by their encounter with HFY, the Defiance, found themselves facing an entire fleet of vessels they couldn't adapt to. Tungsten slugs and metal projectiles filled space as the human ships methodically destroyed their enemies. Admiral Vexthul tried to escape with his flagship, but the humans were ready for him. 3 ships surrounded the Dominion's edge, their weapons charging for a final coordinated attack. "This cannot be happening," Vexthul whispered as he watched his empire's greatest weapon being torn apart by primitive human technology. "We are the masters of the galaxy. We cannot be defeated by crude metal weapons," but he was wrong. The last thing he saw was a tungsten slug the size of a truck, punching through his ship's biomechanical brain. Within hours, word of the victory at Kepler spread throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, which had seemed unstoppable for 300 years, had been defeated by simple human determination and old-fashioned weapons. Other civilizations that had given up hope began to fight back. The Rigelian survivors built kinetic weapons based on human designs. The remaining Centauri forces abandoned their energy weapons for metal projectiles. Across the galaxy, species that had been running from the aliens turned around and stood their ground. Captain Sullivan sat in the damaged bridge of the Defiance, watching the rescue ships dock with his vessel. His crew had survived the impossible and changed the course of galactic history. "Captain," Katie Walsh said from her damaged sensor station, "we're receiving messages from over 100 star systems. They're all saying the same thing. Thank you." Sullivan smiled, though he was too tired to feel much emotion. "Tell them they're welcome, and tell them the galaxy belongs to the free again." The Zephyrian threat wasn't completely over, but the tide had turned. Humanity had proven that sometimes the best way to face the future is with the wisdom of the past. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the simplest one. And sometimes when faced with an unstoppable force, the best response is an immovable object. The USS Defiance had lived up to her name.